Good afternoon. Thank you all for staying close to the end. We're not the last panel, but we are close. Save the best for close to last, we'll say. I'm really excited to talk about what the on-chain Wall Street landscape is going to look like. I want to start with an intro from everyone. Victor, do you want to kick us off and we'll go down the line?
I am Victor Jung, head of digital assets at Hamilton Lane. We are a 950 billion plus AUM AUA listed in NASDAQ, solely focusing on private markets as private equity, real estate infrastructure, and private credit. And what we do is make private funds cheaper, better, faster through the use of blockchain.
Hey, Arun, Krishnakumar. I lead institutional growth at Camino Finance. We are the largest lender on the Solana protocol, Solana blockchain. We've got over $5 billion worth of assets supplied on chain and about 70% of the lending market share on Solana. So that's us. Look forward to the conversation.
I'm Sebastian Badault. I run institutional at Ledger. So Ledger is the global leader in hardware wallets, but we also have a B2B platform that I run. We secure 20% of the world's crypto at Ledger, and we're looking to do a lot more, especially like building our product for the next wave, what we're going to be talking about, the Wall Street guys coming on chain and what they're going to be needing to secure their assets.
And Randy Little, I'm a partner with 50T. To my knowledge, it's the only digital asset-only growth equity fund in the space. We have about $2 billion under management, 24 companies in the portfolio. We're on the board of 11, so we tend to be a little bit more active. We're obviously highly interested in the intersection of kind of Wall Street and in crypto. That's kind of the interest, a lot of the interest of our LPs. So spend a lot of time thinking about stablecoins, RWAs, and how kind of most of the money in the world makes its way into the Web3 space and how the rest of the world can leverage this technology.
That's exactly what we're going to be talking about right now.
It's perfect.
I don't typically do this, but I am going to tell the audience kind of every question that I'm going to ask. When we were prepping for this panel, we kind of came up with a general framework. So 3 main topics. First, why should Wall Street go on chain? Second, why is it taking so long? And third, what will it look like? So let's go ahead and kick off with number 1. Why should Wall Street go on chain? What should use cases look like? What is the interest? Did you want to start?
Sure. I would say one of the things that people generally jumps to right away is the 24/7 trading. That's revolutionary in some asset classes, not all. But I think the other more profound changes are just around the instant finality. I mean, there's massive capital inefficiency based off of T+1, T+2 settlement. That creates credit risk. It adds to the risk of everything that happens. So if you can remove that, you're removing a bunch of steps in the process. And also just the ability to fungibly use capital. Again, this can be sort of replicated with a prime broker. That's the whole idea of that whole space. But if you can do that natively, programmatically, that adds another layer of huge efficiency. So it's something that I think we'll get into how long it'll take, but it's something that I think will transform the capital markets, like it's already started to transform the payment space. I would say that's on the leading edge. But I think as all assets come on chain, which is one of the theses for our fund, we're going to see a huge acceleration of the liquidity and velocity of capital.
I'd say that it's about also, obviously, all of this, but also about innovation, right? At one point or another, when you look at all the waves of innovations that have happened over the past 20, 30 years, we could probably go back, technology wins, right? It doesn't have to be, and I won't say which one because, it might be which chain, et cetera, but at the end of the day, if you build something that is faster, that is cheaper, et cetera, and also knowing that the rails that exist today have been built a long, long time ago, and there hasn't been that much innovation in the financial space, right? Like I think it was Warren Buffett who said that the last innovation was the ATM, right? So there's a big wave of innovation, and so it's kind of in everyone's interest to leverage it and use it, and I think that's why Wall Street should go, because innovation means new ways of doing things and better ways of doing things.
Okay, how long have we got? We've got 35 minutes for the why, right? So I'll start with a practical example. So we had a massive liquidation not so long ago on chain. and a lot of my alt position really got killed. Bitcoin held relatively okay, but the RWA positions I had on chain really saved my day. I was able to really cover for some of the more riskier, closer to liquidation positions that I had on chain. So that's a practical example of how RWAs could be a really good diversification strategy if you're going to be in the crypto land. But going back to, say, 2008, for instance, imagine an on-chain balance sheet for all the banks. You could really sense test instant solvency of a counterparty before transacting with them when you have a serious liquidity crisis in the market. So right from starting from that kind of macro view to how a user can really diversify their portfolio on the crypto side, it has multiple different use cases. You can talk about democratization of access to some of the assets that would normally not be accessible to some of the users. You can talk about fractionalization of ownership. So there's so many different kind of philosophical ideas, but those are the two broad strokes, the two ends of the spectrum. There's so many different use cases in between.
How do you think Wall Street's currently thinking about tokenization and RWAs?
Just AUM, additional AUM, to keep it simple. For them, for most of them, it's basically additional AUM. For some visionaries, one of them is right of me here on stage. There's a lot more than just additional AUM for people like Vic. But I think there is it's generally that, because for them that's revenues, right? So.
Yeah, Victor, why should Wall Street go on chain?
So I'm strictly speaking in the context of private markets. So let's make it more tangible because we're entering the latter part of the day. Can you imagine your life today without Uber, right? Imagine that you gotta go in this smelly, uncomfortable cabs only. That's the only option you have. Go to Paris. The grumpy taxi drivers, that's the only option you have. Imagine how life would that be. A life with no Airbnb, a life with no Netflix. You got to go to movie theaters to watch or pirate them. I call this an email that takes 3 days to land in your inbox. That's private markets. It's a market that has not been accessible for the broader audience, and I call them retail. And retail, we can talk about the core, ultra net worth, high net worth, mass affluent, and mom and pops. Generally, for 50 years, private markets has not been accessible to them. So you still have to, think about a Netflix, or every time you want to watch a movie or a series, you have to log in, put your credentials, the card numbers. This is the current state of affairs for private markets. With blockchain, you can make it cheaper, better, faster. So you can, as Arun mentioned, you can fractionalize. Typically, it's 10 million minimum commitment. You can fractionalize up to 1,000, even $1. On the better side, there's no liquidity on private markets. This could enable and unlock additional liquidity. And the faster, stock markets for us already operate in a very efficient way. We are still dealing with emails and faxes, shockingly enough, but this is an institutional asset class. Now we see blockchain being able to disrupt the entire ecosystem from operations to subscription process, pre-populated KYC AML. And there's a lot of cost efficiencies, and this will help in the adoption, especially when 90% of companies with more than $100 million of revenue are private, and the mass affluent and the retail cannot access to it. We believe that blockchain would unlock all of that together with the regulators to participate in a high growth asset class for the time being.
Yeah, one thing I would add is just another practical example you made me think of was what Figure's done in the HELOC mortgage space. That's a very practical example of what can be done with blockchain. They ostensibly started as a fintech that delivered a better user experience to get a loan in the U.S. Sometimes it can take a month or 2 months to get a HELOC. If anyone's been through the traditional process, it's quite terrible. They use blockchain to lower the cost. The cost of underwriting is, I think it's 60 to 70% lower than traditional means, and they can go from application to funding in about a week's time, as opposed to a month or 2 months.
And people don't talk about it, but this is probably the only asset class in where it has been disrupted by blockchain. 10 to 15% of the home equity loans are issued by Figure, if I'm not wrong.
No, that's exactly right. So, but the point is that the users have no idea that blockchain is even involved at all, but they've done the work to originate loans through a whole network of providers to put things on blockchain rails, make it easy to diligence. There's not redundant diligence processes that exist in the traditional market. And then they also were able to get the capital market takeout done, getting Goldman, JP Morgan, the big mortgage players to actually buy blockchain-based loans. So that putting that all together is difficult, but it's been a transformative user experience. And I just love that example as a way to use blockchain in real life.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. I was just going to add to that, thinking that down the line when you're looking at IPOs, et cetera, that are being done, you have to file hundreds and hundreds of pages, and all of those could be like smart contracts, right? Like, so that's not the case yet, but like looking forward, like there's so many use cases where you could just simplify everything and have everything on chain and transparent for everyone to see. So.
No, I was just going to say Mike Agnew will be very pleased that we're giving him a lot of our time here on the stage. But the thing I really love about what Figure managed to achieve, they've been very quiet about how they've managed to tokenize $17 billion worth of assets, real world assets. And I don't think any other asset class has been kind of tokenized to that scale. And they're growing at several hundreds of millions of dollars on chain per month. So the pace at which they are able to bring assets on chain is also mind blowing. So effectively, they have the entire process of onboarding assets nailed. So that's just a case study, in my opinion, of how you scale an on-chain economy for a specific asset class, create liquidity, and from there then start thinking about DeFi utility. That's clearly an amazing case study that there's lots to learn from.
Okay, so we know the use cases. We've touched on the efficiencies that can happen, how it can be improved. We've touched a little bit on this, on infrastructure. Why is it taking so long? What's the holdup, I guess? Did you want to start, Sebastian?
I mean, I think part of it, there might be a little bit of PTSD from some of the things that they've seen in the past. So I think, obviously, and I think that goes for, again, like every technological revolution, the incumbents are usually the last ones to, put their feet in the water. They're a little bit, maybe because they don't need it as much. So you see innovation from new entrants, new players, and then people that have been in the space, they kind of like look at it. Obviously, the fact that the industry is incredibly regulated also has a big impact on, because even though we're seeing the Genius Act, et cetera, that's not everything, like there's still, if you talk to some of the really large banks, they'll tell you that, they're willing to do some things, but not everything yet, because like they don't have clear, view as to what it is that they can do and cannot do. That will come, but that'll take some time. So regulation is another piece. And then I think the other thing is money, because right now they're making a lot of money with what they're doing. And so the idea is like, how are they going to make money in that new world, right? So I think that that's a big part of it. And what's going to drive them coming into the space is, them finding ways. So, I mean, BlackRock's been very successful, like doing ETFs, et cetera. But that's, is it really, a on-chain product? It's kind of like using an old product and into the space, but they found a way. I think that also will drive a lot of adoption. And that's why it's taking some time, because they haven't really found the sweet spot, some of them anyway.
Yeah, so the answer to that really involves thinking through the RWA stack. So just drawing out the RWA stack on Solana like a few days ago for something else. But if you think about the number of activities that is involved in picking up an asset and taking it on chain. Of course, tokenization is just the start of the journey. Even to get there, you've got to have transfer agents lined up. You've got to have all the regulatory wrappers. And of course, you also need to make sure that the token mechanics that you're using is kind of viable for DeFi consumption. So that's the upstream. And then you also, if you're going to go DeFi distribution, like if you're going to use a platform like Camino, the ideal form at this stage is going permissionless. So there is a bit of legal compliance and tech operational angle to that. So that has to be built in. And then you have to think about price feeds, proof of reserves. And once you have lined all this infrastructure element out, then you start thinking about liquidity. Who is going to be the first investor to take the asset on chain? Who is going to be the investor who is going to be providing lending opportunities for this asset when it's used as collateral on chain? And who's going to provide DEX liquidity? How are you going to incentivize the whole launch? So tokenizing an asset is just the starting point. It's not the end stage. It's just the starting point. And if you really want to prove that an asset has actually got legs on DeFi, there is so much more involved. And it is a journey. And a lot of these actors, or a lot of these capabilities, capabilities along the stack is still being built, right? And that's the fun thing here. You're actually living through this massive transformation of financial services, and you're being part of it. History is happening here, and it takes time. It's a journey.
Victor, how are you thinking about the?
Yes, I think first to give some stats. Back in 1991, the use of cloud services was approximately 3%. After 30 years, you would think, okay, everybody's using cloud. Actually, cloud, from what I see from the latest research reports, is approximately under 60%. And that's shocking, right? So these takes...
And it's the same with e-commerce, right? Like you think e-commerce is everything. It's not, right?
It's
like
not.
regular e-commerce is still much larger than e-commerce 20 years
So
ago.
here, I give it to I blame it first on a time factor. That is a common denominator. If you start spying on everybody's phone calls, the common expression is, I have no time. I'm busy, right? We're sacrificing time with our kids, with our partners, and everything just to get more work done, even sleep. So I say that's one which is very important. It has nothing to do with technology. Second, I blame the engineers. A lot of engineers here, they talk about Kubernetes and layer 1, layer 2, proof of work, Look, when I use Apple Pay, I don't give a shit about what's the 7 steps behind. Is it cheaper, better, faster? Then I'll pay for it, right? So engineers and narrative, it's another problem, right? They get too technical, the TPS. Look, the end user...
There's none in the audience.
Yes.
It's spoken like a true product guy.
Ironically, engineers are the smartest. I didn't know that storytelling was a talent until I arrived in the DeFi ecosystem, because no one could tell a simple story, because all you have is 30 seconds elevator speech, right? Everybody's ADHD. We can't stay focused for over 2 seconds in the same user interface. So narrative is one thing. You can blame also the regulators, the lawyers, et cetera. But I think it's the narrative, and last but not least, also a little bit of complacency when we don't have time. Why? Private markets, for every bank and private wealth, they're having the best years of their lives. Crazy AUM, crazy inflows. And when it comes to private equity and private bank, everything's about raising money and deploying, right? Operational, I don't care. In order for me to do blockchain, I have to open a book that I've never opened up after my master's or undergrad. It's very difficult to reuse your brain and take extra time at night and enroll in MIT, Oxford courses for a blockchain that is not worth very much. And you need to compete with guys that are trying to sell you a pixelated JPEG at 1 ETH, right? This is how life is changing. It takes time, and their lives right now, when you're at like mid-40s plus, you're not incentivized to halt operations, use extra time, risk your marriage and your sleep, and do something that will hinder your bonus payments, etc. So I think it's a mix of everything, but just to make it a bit controversial, as engineers, I blame you guys. You guys are smart, figure it out. And second would be, just human behavior and incentives.
What do you think, Randy? That's hard to top, but
I'll see what I can do. I think that it's still so nascent. I mean, right now, if you set aside stablecoins, it's a little over $30 billion of RWAs on chain. I mean, compared to hundreds of trillions of dollars of actual assets. So it's tiny, tiny. A lot of it is kind of money market funds, which I think is a good first step. But I think the real value comes when other assets come on chain. And a lot of these are not digitally natively issued, which is critical. A lot of it is traditional assets go into an SPV. You tokenize the SPV, which creates its own set of inefficiencies. So for example, if you tokenize equities that way, what do you do with corporate actions? What do you do with voting? So I think that there's a lot of maturation that needs to happen. I think some of it is there's been lack of regulatory clarity, to say the least, in the US. I think it's becoming more clear. It's not perfectly clear. That will need to happen. But then I would just draw one other example. When you think about the time it took to electronify the capital markets, it really started in the late 80s and ramped up in the 90s. Today, we've reached about 90% electronic markets. Some markets, like fixed income, are still only 60% electronic. It took equities even, which are well suited for electronification, at least 10 to 15 years to get to 50% electronified. And I would say that blockchain enabling the capital markets is a much bigger change. It's a more impactful change. But if you think about rewiring the operating system of the way capital markets works, it's a much bigger change than changing how orders are handled, orders are matched. This is like the back end, back office processes that are being fundamentally changed. So I think it'll happen within that sort of time frame because just the pace of change is just ramped up. But I think it'll be huge when it happens, but it's going to take time. And I think I just pick up on one thing that Sebastian said. I think transparency is another wonderful example of all this, and I think it's great to save operational costs, especially when you get into more complex structured products, CLOs, things like that. It adds a lot of efficiency. But I think a lot of the larger capital markets players are making tons of money on the opacity. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the markets, a lot of the traditional huge markets like derivatives and fixed income are much, much slower to electronify because the banks have benefited from sitting in the middle of the market. The markets are opaque and they make tons of money with that. So if you then take that away and say, let's make that all transparent, let's make everyone equal, that is not good for banks. So they have all the connectivity, they have the distribution. Eventually they will be forced to come around just like they have with electronic trading, but they will drag their feet. So that's another, I would say, less obvious friction.
One thing I'll add is to say something positive on the moves from like the traditional players is that and this is something that I've been surprised about in the discussions that I've had with them in the past couple of years, is that it's not they're just sitting idle and not doing anything about it, right? Like they all have plans and teams and very brilliant teams that are like ready to do big things. To your point, it's going to take time, but it's not like they're just waiting and saying, well, we'll put this and we'll look at this when it's ready or when we have the regulation. They're ready, like not fully ready, but they're like getting ready for it. And I think that's an important thing to take into consideration.
What about from an infrastructure perspective? Is the infrastructure there? What challenges exist still?
Well, so I'll speak obviously from my standpoint, which is really around security and making sure that when I was talking about the PSD aspect, a big part of it is, can this be secure? Right now, like the ETF, for example, is really easy because it's not really on chain. It's like it's basically a product that you're doing it the old-fashioned way. Like, are you willing to hold Bitcoin on your balance sheet? And if you do that, what are you going to do with it? Right? Like, how do you secure it, etc. And I think that's one of the things where you need the tools, and they have to be obviously the gold standard in terms of security. I think they have to be very close to what they're using today. So, for example, like we use HSM technology, which is something that is being used by traditional custodians. So when we talk to them about doing it for Bitcoin or for ETH, et cetera, they understand because it's like the setup that they already have. So you're talking the same language kind of in a way. So on the security aspect, I think that's what we're trying to do, right? Like build something similar to what they've been using so that they don't need to relearn everything. So from my standpoint, that's more important.
And I think to carry on to Sebastian's point, I think that ultimately banks are going to choose, a lot of the value chain that they're going to want to insource and control. I think that'll certainly go to custody. That's something that's very comfortable for banks. They have the brand, the reputation, the balance sheet. So that would suggest that they're going to want to use custody technology. So that would be like a Ledger Enterprise or a Fireblocks versus outsource that to another digital asset custodian today. I mean, I think they'll have other sorts of clients, but I think that banks will want to have that and control it as they build products on top of it.
Just to add, we're looking at it very much from a TradFi perspective, but there's also a DeFi angle here, which is the DeFi platforms out there. They'll also have to start embracing some of the standards that TradFi have set for themselves. Those rules and regulations have been there for a reason. And personally, for me, one of the things I'm deeply proud about Kamino is not just today. I'm not saying this just to shill the platform, but even back in the day, like 2 years ago, just after FTX, whenever there used to be a liquidation event in the market, the CEO used to come out and talk about how the liquidation engines have performed very publicly. Most other platforms, DeFi platforms, back then they would be shilling the yields that they're able to produce. But the moment there is a liquidation event, they would shut up. whereas this organization would shout out about how risk managed they have been. And even today, this across chains, across lending platforms, we are the only ones that offer a real-time risk dashboard looking at risk metrics across 12 different dimensions. You can go to risk.camino.finance and see it live. The reason I say that is not because Camino does it alone, but that's the culture we have to have on the DeFi side. As Vic said, TradFi do not have to compete with NFT holders and NFT regions. There is a space for that, absolutely, but there's got to be a space where people can transact on chain safely and feel comfortable doing that. And that's a journey. It's a cultural shift. It's of course, from a legal and compliance perspective, there's quite a lot needs to be clarified, and there's got to be a lot of work done there. But also from a DeFi standpoint, we've got to embrace some of those aspects.
Well, and I think, once you get through the regulatory clarity, I think that what will happen with DeFi is it will become the back office for a lot of what's happening, because there's a huge number of activities that banks do that you do not need an office tower of people to manage. There's many use cases that could be handled programmatically on chain, transparently, cheaply, instantly, and I think that'll migrate there. We already see it in kind of the borrow lend marketplaces where, like, if you want to borrow against your Bitcoin, it's, if you go to a centralized party, it's 10% plus. On Aave, it's 5-6%. So it's way more capital efficient. Like, you couldn't even get wholesale funding against Bitcoin, less than 7-8%. I think that'll probably come down over time.
It's free on Camino, cheap shill.
No, that's what I'm saying. So I think that we'll see more relationships like Coinbase Morpho. I think Robinhood just announced something like that. But I think for the average user, that's how they'll touch DeFi. It'll kind of disappear into the background. There will always be the more crypto-forward retail people that are looking for the newest things. It's going to go to the web interface. But the average person, like I always think about my mom or dad, are they going to go to like the Camino dashboard? Probably not. But they would, if JP Morgan had a Camino market through their Chase app, they probably would use it, and they wouldn't even know it, right?
Victor, how are you thinking about infrastructure?
Whether the infrastructure is ready. Again, another, just to make it a bit more fun. As long as we have 90-year-olds, 80-year-olds, and 10-year-olds, the infrastructure will never be like harmonized or standardized, because a 90, 80-year-old will never use a MetaMask or a Phantom wallet, right? They like the trust factor. They like the relationship manager, the financial advisor. Now, there's a life story in where a bank owned by a family, it's a private bank, very successful. They've decided to take this path of staying class. So no digital, just, Napa Valley, Basquiat, events, and, really like for the VVIPs. Now, all of a sudden, they start asking their clients, hey, your son and daughter, why are they not showing up recently? And this is to the point to say that infrastructure is not ready yet, but it will change. And the answer was, they say you suck, right? And they're like, beg your pardon. They say that you suck because, first, you don't have an app. Number two, you don't have any crypto solutions. And they just hate going to these wine parties, and it's a waste of time. They are doing everything with their app. And the fact that you don't have one for them is a waste of time. You're too expensive. And this ties with this one of the most recent powerful research analysis that has been conducted, in where we're living in the biggest, greatest generational wealth transfer that the human history has ever seen. Now, 81% of the recipients answered and stated that as soon as they inherit their assets from their parents, the first thing that they're going to do is fire their financial advisor. Why? The first wallet that they had was a Revolut, or was an app-based account. Now, think about, you ask them to go and open up a bank account in a, retail high street. You have to wait a few hours and paperwork. They get shocked, right? So for them, the risk of embracing the old infrastructure, they would never do that. everything has to be instant. Like they need to have everything in one place. Again, ADHD is not even a disease these days. It's like oxygen. I mean, everything has to be atomic. So the infrastructure with these users who take for granted all of this digital atomic settlement, transparency, et cetera, I think all of the custodians, they will adapt to it. Heck, and this is a good segue for the last question, and I'm sure Ledger will love it, is like at some point, everything will be on a self-custodial base, right? And people may not know, but that's where I think the new generation will kick in, and every company has to have a strategy for the future, now for the 90, 87-year-old, but also for what's next to come.
I mean, what's interesting is that it's a cultural shift that's very wide, that goes beyond finance. I mean, finance, obviously, what we're talking about, and it's a great example. And your Revolut example is on point. Like all of my kids have Revolut accounts, and they will never go to my bank. And I would, and if I could, I would do the same, because when I use Revolut, for me, it's so much better than any other app that I've seen. And it has crypto like built in, right? Like you buy Bitcoin on Revolut with one swipe. But the cultural shift, I think, goes beyond, in the sense that it's the same kind of thing that you used to, give your health to like your doctor, and like you wouldn't see your blood results, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, oh, he's taking care of it for me, and your financial advisor is taking care of your money. And think we're at and I will get the news from like CBS because I trust it, et cetera. And then that trust is like gone, because you're realizing that you can learn on your own and you can know on your own. And so you want to know about your health, you want to like know about your finance, you want to know about your news on your own. And I think that's the cultural shift that's happening. That's really big.
One more funny anecdote. It's slightly off topic, but just on the whole point that we're making with Revolut, my 18-year-old, when she has cash, she's like, I think that feels like fake money. She doesn't believe it's real money until it's on an app. She's like, it's easy to spend because it feels fake. It's like, well, it is a little bit.
Bill. I agree.
It is a little bit, yeah.
It is a good segue into our last question, though. So, we covered the use cases. We covered why it's taking so long. What will it look like when Wall Street is onboarded on-chain? We'll say, I guess, what are you most excited about in the RWA space? Maybe we can start with you, Arun.
For me, I think it'll be aligned with what the new generation is all about, instant gratification, right? So from T+2, we'll have T in terms of settlement. So it's not going to be we send money somewhere and they have to wait a couple of days. We do a transaction, and for it to settle, we wait some time. So that's kind of, and it unlocks a lot of capital efficiencies, right? So I think that's the kind of the gist of where we're heading. But I would like to be in a place where I can sell a part of my mangrove in India and buy a part of Buckingham Palace here, right? So that's the level of tokenization that we should be aiming for, irrespective of the liquidity profile of assets, irrespective of where the assets are, what the form of the asset is. But on a more grounded basis, I would like to get to $100 billion of TVL on Camino.
Victor, what do you think? Where are we headed?
Everything will be money. Everything will be cash. Everything will become a payment method. So in concrete, RWA is real assets. Sometimes I call it the real worst asset because it's so hard to tokenize. But that's already happening. Next in line would be NBA. Stands for non-bankable assets. So music royalties, art, sports, everything that is non-bankable, in where everything will be represented as a payment method. So everything will be money, and this will be like internet, capital markets, internet money. And it's a pure democratization to the max. It's atomic, transparent, and it will be hopefully more trustworthy, and it will grow the entire pie size. Great innovation.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending. I'm sorry to tell you that the votes
So
are now
I agree with all of that. I would just say one of the other themes that I think is really interesting is the prospect for AI and the agentic economy. It's one of the focus areas for our next fund. But if you think about, once you have RWAs, everything instantly settlement, you have stable coins, I think there's a huge amount of latitude. Once all that infrastructure is in place, I think that there will be agents that will act on people's behalves that will replace at least part of what financial advisors do today. I don't think humans will come out of financial advice given the emotional piece to it, but there's a lot that could be automated, risk managed, probably much more optimally than is done today. And having all of the assets on chain in a programmatic way is the first step to doing that. I still think that's a few years off. But I think that's something that will certainly emerge over the next 3-4 years, given the rate of change that we're seeing across crypto and AI. And that's something that I'm actually super excited about.
I'll totally second you on that, and the fact that actually there's this very strong link between the two. Because right now, if I want to give an agent access to my bank account, it would be next to impossible. But if I want to give him access to a wallet where I put a little bit of crypto and then have the agent do things with it, it can, right? And people have done experiments with it, like have agents make money for them, etc. So that is a use case that exists today, right? That probably will get democratized, etc. But I fully agree with you on that. I like this idea of thinking that, because I think it's part of the ethos of the industry at the beginning, is that it's going to be fully global, that there's going to be like interoperability across like the different chains and access to like the different markets, which is really important as well, because we've talked a lot when people used to ask what is the use case. Well, the use case is that there's 2 billion people that are unbanked in the world, right? So giving access to all of that, and I like your idea of like the growth in India, is also like a way to bring in a lot of people that currently don't have access, and maybe to level the playing field a little bit, to give them access to things that they don't have access to today. And then, I love this idea of keeping, so we're talking about transparency, but also privacy, because those things are human rights. They're really, really important. And I think that in this new world, people will be able to have both, right? Like transparency and where the transactions are. But if you want to keep, remain private, you'll be able to keep that privacy. I think that's really important as well.
So, Sebastian, I think it was you that mentioned the institutions are there, they're ready, they're thinking about this. We've talked about the infrastructure. Victor, you said the infrastructure is there. I mean, what's the next catalyst for driving Wall Street adoption? Victor, do you have
engineers?
No, regulations.
Yeah, regulations.
Regulation. Yeah. And more use cases, scale. No POCs, but real native. Yesterday, somebody mentioned no more a replica. It has to be native on-chain use cases that have really proven to be cheaper, better, faster, without twisting the story. It has to be just so self-evident, just like Apple Pay. Yep.
And I think corporate adoption is an important thing as well. I think that, when we talk about the Genius Act and we talked about stables, what we should be seeing is people that are not in crypto space today going into it. So I'm thinking always of Amazon, because clearly saving $2-3 billion in credit card fees by issuing an Amazon coin and then giving you an incentive to use it instead of using dollars, I think is huge. And that I think will also spearhead and then maybe them having some of their treasury in Bitcoin, right? We at Ledger, we have a big part of our treasury in Bitcoin. And I think that more and more corporates will do that as well. And I think that they're the clients of the bigger banks. If they start moving towards crypto, they will also force the overall ecosystem to adopt it. So I think that could be something that would move the needle in some ways.
We only have a couple minutes left. I want to give everyone an opportunity to answer this last question. So we'll say 5 years out, what are you most excited about when it comes to Wall Street on-chain? Are you ready, Randy? Do you want to start? We'll go down.
5 years out. Well, like I said, I think there'll be a lot more going on with AI. But I mean, I think that from the perspective of the capital markets infrastructure, like I said, I think it's going to take 10 to 15 years to really rewire most asset classes and have it actually have the scale and liquidity that we see today. So 5 years from now, I think we'll be partially along that way. I mean, you see most of the studies that are out today project, I think it's 15 to 20 trillion of assets on chain by around 2030. I mean, that's probably correct, plus or minus 10 trillion. Again, if you think about that in the scale of all assets, which is hundreds of trillions of dollars, there will still be a lot more to go. But I think that even with that amount on chain, there's a lot of these use cases that we're talking about will be able to come to life. But obviously there will be more to come in terms of the liquidity perspective of it.
What I'm excited about is for the industry to grow up as a whole, and that I hope that we put in the rearview mirror a lot of the negative things that have happened in the past. And I think a lot of it goes to having very strong foundations, security being obviously one of the key ones. So what I hope to see in 5 years is obviously all the inflows, et cetera, but like in a space where we're not talking about scandals and this and that, or deep pegs, etc. But well, this is here to stay. I think that that's really important.
Those inefficiencies are where money is made. But from my perspective, I want to be in a place where we don't talk about blockchains, protocols. We don't talk about TCP/IP when we use our internet anymore. So we've got to get to that place as soon as possible. And I've seen technologies, particularly payment technologies in India, scale massively. So but in a matter of 5 years, I went from paying in cash and a taxi driver turning around and said, "No, I don't accept cash." That is not too far away if we use stablecoin as rails, and there's so much that could exponentially drive the growth for us. I think that's what would be awesome.
Save best for last. I'm sure a lot of we see a lot of young and not less young audience. So a lot of you have missed the internet, the .com bubble or opportunity. A lot of you also have missed the COVID RNA train, probably. What excites me the most is the blockchain and AI. Look, everybody talks AI. I don't know how many really understand, but blockchain is real. It's more immediate. You can do good, make money. So socially, commercially, it's an opportunity for you to stay in whatever you do, representing here finance, but it's applicable everywhere. So my asset class, 50% from for this to be democratized by retail, but also by the digital natives. So that's what excites me the most.
Great. Thank you all so much. Thank you for joining us.